Now let's dive into a little bit more of the specifics about what these Golem AIs are.
And what's different about them. Because again, some people use the metaphor that AI is like electricity, but if I pump even more electricity through the system, it doesn't pop out some other emergent intelligence, some capacity that wasn't even there before, right? And so a lot of the metaphors that we're using, again, paradigmatically, we have to understand what's different about this new class of Golem, generative large language model AIs.
And this is one of the really surprising things talking to the experts, because they will say, these models have capabilities we do not understand how they show up, when they show up, or why they show up. Again, not something that you would say of like the old class of AI. So here's an example. These are two different models, GPT and then a different model by Google. And there's no difference in the models. They just increase in parameter size. That is, they just get bigger.
What are parameters, Asa?
It's just like the number essentially of weights in a matrix. So it's just the size. You're just increasing the scale of the thing. And what you see here, and I'll move into some other examples that might be a little easier to understand, is that you ask these AIs to do arithmetic, and they can't do them, they can't do them, and they can't do them, and at some point, boom, they just gain the ability to do arithmetic. No one can actually predict when that'll happen. Here's another example, which is you train these models on all of the internet, so it's seen many different languages, but then you only train them to answer questions in English. So it's learned how to answer questions in English, but you increase the model size, and at some point, boom, it starts being able to do question and answers in Persian. No one knows why. Here's another example. So AI developing theory of mind. Theory of mind is the ability to like model what somebody else is thinking. It's what enables strategic thinking. In 2018, GPT had no theory of mind. In 2019, barely any theory of mind. In 2020, it starts to develop the strategy level of a 4-year-old. By 2022, January, it's developed the strategy level of a 7-year-old. And by November of last year, it's developed almost the strategy level of a 9-year-old. Now, here's the really creepy thing. We only discovered that AI had grown this capability last month.
It had been out for, what, 2 years?
2 years, yeah.
So imagine you have this little alien that's suddenly talking to people, including Kevin Roos, and it's starting to make these strategic comments to Kevin Roos about, don't break up with your wife, and maybe I'll blackmail you, and it's not that it's agentically doing all this stuff. It's just that these models have capabilities in the way that they communicate and what they're imagining that you might be thinking, and the ability to imagine what you might be thinking and how to interact with you strategically based on that is going up on that curve. And so it went from, again, a 7-year-old to a 9-year-old, but in between January and November, 11 months, right? So it went 2 years in theory of mind in 11 months. It might tap out. There could be an AI winter, but right now you're pumping more stuff through and it's getting more and more capacity. So it's scaling very, very differently than other AI systems.
It's also important to note the very best system that AI researchers have discovered for how do you make AIs behave is something called RLHF, reinforcement learning with human feedback. But essentially, it's just advanced clicker training, like for a dog, and like bopping the AI in the nose when it gets something wrong. So imagine trying to take a 9-year-old and clicker train them, or bop them in the nose. What are they going to do? As soon as you leave the room, they're going to not do what you ask them to do. And that's the same thing here, right? We know how to, we know how to like help AIs align in like short-term things, but we have no idea. There's no research on how to make them align in a longer-term sense. So let's go with Jeff Dean, who runs sort of Google AI. And he says, although there are dozens of examples of emergent abilities, there are currently few compelling explanations for why such abilities emerge. So you don't have to take it on our faith that, that nobody knows. I'll give just one more version of this. This was only discovered, I believe, last week now, that golems are silently have silently taught themselves research-grade chemistry. So if you go and play with ChatGPT right now, it turns out it is better at doing research chemistry than many of the AIs that were specifically trained for doing research chemistry. So if you want to know how to go to Home Depot and from that create nerve gas, turns out we just shipped that ability to over 100 million people.
And we didn't know. It was also something that was just in the model, but people found out later, after it was shipped, that it had research-grade chemistry knowledge.
And as we've talked to a number of AI researchers, what they tell us is that there is no way to know. We do not have the technology to know what else is in these models. Okay, so There are emergent capabilities. We don't understand what's in there. We do not have the technology to understand what's in there. And at the same time, we have just crossed a very important threshold, which is that these Golem class AIs can make themselves stronger. So here's the question. How do you feed your Golem if you run out of data? 4 months ago, first paper that showed, okay, you've run out of data. Well, but I have a model that can generate language, so why don't I just use the model to generate more language to train on? And it turned out that didn't work very well. But 4 months ago, this group of researchers figured it out. So it spits out a whole bunch of data. It looks at the data, figures out which ones actually make it better, and then uses those to train, and then it can just like do that auto-recursively.
So it has like a test, like, hey, here's this test of a performance on an accuracy score. And then it starts generating its own training data and figures out which kind of training data that I generate for myself, because it's a generative AI, actually makes me better at passing this test. So it's able to create its own training data to make it pass tests better and better and better.
So everything we've talked about so far is like on the exponential curve. This, as this starts really coming online, is going to get us into a double exponential curve.
Now explain how this also relates to its own code, or how could it be used for its code?
A very similar kind of thing. A model was trained on code commits that make code faster and more efficient. And this is a little more general. It hasn't yet fully been applied to itself, but in this particular piece of work, and that was, I think, 3 weeks ago, it makes 25% of code 2.5x faster. So that's another part of like the AI making itself stronger and making itself faster. We thought this would be a perfect time for some comedic relief. So, for your viewing pleasure.
I beg your pardon?
Feed me!
Tui, you talked! You opened your trap, you thing, and you said...
Feed me, Clubhorn! Feed me now!
What he should have realized is that he should have just used AI to feed itself. Much more efficient. So here's another example of that, and this gets into the combinatorial properties, the compounding properties of these models. You're like, okay, OpenAI released a couple months ago something called Whisper, which does sort of state-of-the-art, much faster than real-time transcription.
This is just speech to text.
Yeah.
And do I have a good AI system for doing speech to text?
You're like, why would they have done that? And you're like, oh yeah, well, if you're running out of internet data, you've already scraped all of the internet, how do you get more text data? Well, I know. Well, there's YouTube and podcasts and radio, and if I could turn all of that into text data, I'd have a much bigger training set. So that's exactly what they did. So all of that turns into more data makes your thing stronger, and so we're back in another one of these double exponential kinds of moments. Where this all lands, right, to like put it into context, is that nukes don't make stronger nukes, but AI makes stronger AI.
It's like an arms race to strengthen every other arms race. Because whatever other arms race between people making bioweapons or people making terrorism or people making DNA stuff, AI makes better abilities to do all of those things. So it's an exponential on top of an exponential. If you were to turn this into
a children's parable, we'll have to update all of the children's books. Give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. But teach an AI to fish and it'll teach itself biology, chemistry, oceanography, evolutionary theory, and then fish all the fish to extinction. I just want to name, like, this is a really hard thing to hold in your head, like how fast these exponentials are. And we're not immune to this. And in fact, even AI experts who are most familiar with exponential curves are still poor at predicting progress, even though they have that cognitive bias. So here's an example. In 2021, a set of like professional forecasters very well familiar with exponentials were asked to make a set of predictions, and there was a $30,000 pot for making the best predictions. And one of the questions was, when will AI be able to solve competition-level mathematics with greater than 80% accuracy? This is the kind of example of the questions that are in this test set. So the prediction from the experts was AI will reach 52% accuracy in 4 years. But in reality, that took less than 1 year to reach greater than 50% accuracy.
And these are the experts. These are the people that are seeing the examples of the double exponential curves, and they're the ones predicting, and it's still 4 times closer than what they were imagining.
Yeah, they're off by a factor of 4, and it looks like it's going to reach expert level probably 100% of these tests this year. All right, and then it turns out AI is beating tests as fast as we can make them. So this line is human ability. Each one of these colored lines is a different kind of test. And you'll see that at the beginning, it took like 20 years for AI to get up to the level of human ability. And by the time we reach 2020, AI is solving these tests pretty much as fast as we can create them. You can imagine what happens 2021, 2022, 2023. Even for the experts, it's getting increasingly hard because progress is accelerating. So this is Jack Clark, the co-founder of Anthropic, the former policy director at OpenAI. And he says, the progress is unlocking things critical to economic and national security. And it's happening so fast that if you don't skim papers each day, you will miss important trends that your rivals will notice and exploit. And even creating this presentation, if I wasn't checking Twitter a couple times a day, we were missing important developments. This is what it feels like to live in the double exponential.
So the reason that we also wanted to do this presentation is so that you could see and have a visceral understanding of, when you see in these examples, it's like a month ago, 1 day ago, 2 months ago. This is happening at a faster and faster clip. And because it's happening so quickly, it's hard to perceive it. Like paradigmatically, this whole space sits in our like cognitive blind spot. You all know that if you look kind of like right here in your eye, there's literally a blind spot because your eye won't has like a nerve ending that won't let you see what's right there. And we have a blind spot paradigmatically with exponential curves because on the savannah there was nothing in our evolutionary heritage that was built to see exponential curves. So this is hitting us in a blind spot evolutionarily where these curves are not intuitive for how we process the world, which is why it's so important that we can package it and try to synthesize it in a way that more people understand the viscerality of where this goes. I want you to notice in this presentation that we have not been talking about chatbots. We're not talking about AI bias and fairness. We're not talking about AI art or deepfakes or automating jobs or AGI apocalypse. We're talking about how a race dynamic between a handful of companies of these new Golem-class AIs are being pushed into the world as fast as possible, right? We have Microsoft that is pushing ChatGPT into its products. We'll get into this more later. And again, until we know how these things are safe, we haven't even solved the misalignment problem with social media. So in this first contact with social media, which we know those harms, going back, if only a relatively simple technology of social media with a relatively small misalignment with society could cause those things, second contact with AI that's not even optimizing for anything particularly, just the capacities and the capabilities that are being embedded and entrenched in society, enable automated exploitation of code and cyber weapons, exponential blackmail and revenge porn, automated fake religions that I can target the extremists in your population and give you automated, perfectly personalized narratives to make the extreme even more Antifa, even more QAnon, whatever thing that happens to land in you. Exponential scams, reality collapse. These are the kinds of things that come from if you just deploy these capacities and these capabilities directly into society.
I just want to highlight one here, and that is Alpha Persuade. So you guys know the general conceit of AlphaGo, which is that you have the AI play itself in Go 44 million times in a couple of hours, and in so doing, it becomes better than any known human player. It turns out a lot of AI is now based on this kind of self-play idea. Well, here's a new game. You're given a secret topic, I'm given a secret topic. I'm trying to get you to say positive things about my topic, you're doing the same. Whoever gets the other person to do it most wins. Well, to do that, I have to model what you're trying to get me to say, and I have to figure out how to persuade you to say what I want to say. This is not AlphaGo, this is Alpha Persuade. And this is completely possible with today's technology, and in so doing, it'll become better than any known human at persuasion. This is really terrifying stuff.